While checking a notification on my best friend's old phone, I noticed a glowing blue that anchored to a remote motel 3 hours outside the city. The moment I pulled into that gravel lot, I saw a familiar flash of auburn hair. My heart stopped. I watched as my best friend of 30 years checked into a room with a woman the world thought was dead. What I saw through that window made my blood run cold and my breath catch in my throat, because the daughter I'd been mourning for 3 agonizing years hadn't disappeared. She had been stolen by the man I trusted most. Thank you for joining me today. Before we dive into the rest of this journey, please hit like, subscribe, and let me know in the comments where you are watching from. A quick reminder, this is a dramatized story intended for storytelling and educational purposes. While inspired by the harrowing reality of betrayal and missing persons, any resemblance to specific real-world events is coincidental. Now, let me tell you how it all began. The highway mist hadn't lifted since I crossed the county line. I kept driving anyway, the steady hum of the tires against the pavement echoing the dull ache that had lived in my chest for over 1,000 days. I was heading toward the Blue Pine Motel, a place that didn't exist on any map of my life, driven by a digital signal that felt like a heartbeat. I just needed to understand why Andrew was there. I needed a reason to believe that the man who had held me while I sobbed at Grace's empty vigil wasn't the same man currently holding the key to room 12. My daughter had been gone for exactly 3 years, 2 months, and 11 days, and in one afternoon, every memory of my life was about to be set on fire. The Blue Pine Motel was a place where time went to die, a collection of peeling white paint and neon signs that flickered like a dying pulse. I sat in my truck, the engine killed and the vents clicking as they cooled, watching the rain wash over the windshield. My hands, calloused from 30 years of gripping fire hoses and pulling people from the wreckage of their own lives, were trembling. I checked the phone again. The blue dot was steady, pinned directly to the coordinates of this gravel lot. Andrew was here. My best friend, the man who had delivered the eulogy at my wife's funeral and sat through every fruitless police briefing with me, was 3 hours away from the city in a dive that smelled of damp earth and secrets. Then, the door to a silver sedan opened. Andrew stepped out first. Even in the dim, gray light of the storm, his presence was unmistakable. That sharp, polished posture and the shock of silver hair that always looked perfectly groomed, even now. He looked around once, a quick, predatory glance that felt entirely too practiced for a man just checking into a motel. He walked to the passenger side and opened the door. My breath hitched. I leaned forward, my forehead pressing against the cold glass of the window. A woman stepped out. She was wearing a heavy coat, the hood pulled low, but as she turned toward the room, the wind caught her hair. It was auburn, a deep, rich red that glowed even in the rain. It was a color I had memorized over 27 years, a color I had seen in 1,000 childhood photos and a million nightmares since the night she vanished. It was Grace. She didn't look like a captive, but she didn't look whole either. Her movements were stiff, her head bowed as Andrew placed a possessive hand on the small of her back, guiding her toward the yellow light of room 12. I wanted to scream her name. I wanted to throw the truck into gear and ram through the wall of that motel just to reach her. But the disciplined firefighter in me, the man who knew that rushing into a backdraft without a plan was a death sentence, held me in the seat. I watched the door click shut. The "no vacancy" sign hummed above them, a cruel mockery of the hole that had been left in my life for 3 years. She was alive. She was 10 yards away from me. And she was with the only person I had left in this world to trust. The realization didn't just break my heart. It burned my entire reality to the ground. I gripped the steering wheel until the leather groaned, staring at that closed door, knowing that the man I called brother was the monster I had been hunting all along. The metal of the steering wheel felt cold and unforgiving beneath my white-knuckled grip. My boots were already heavy, itching to kick that motel door off its hinges, to storm into room 12 and drag my daughter into the safety of the rain. Every instinct I had honed over 3 decades of rushing into burning buildings screamed at me to move. In the fire service, seconds were the difference between life and death. You didn't wait, you acted. But as I stared at the peeling yellow paint of the door, a different kind of heat began to simmer under my skin, not the impulsive roar of a flame, but the steady, controlled burn of a veteran who knew how to read a structure before entry. If I went in now, what would I find? Andrew was a man of immense resources and sharp, legal teeth. He had spent 3 years playing the grieving uncle while holding the keys to my daughter's cage. A confrontation in a remote parking lot would be his word against mine. A chaotic scene he could easily spin into a misunderstanding or a mental breakdown brought on by my grief. I forced a long, shuddering breath through my teeth, watching the exhaust from the silver sedan dissipate in the damp air. I had to be the investigator, not just the father. I needed to know where he was taking her, how many other renovation properties were part of this nightmare, and exactly how deep the rot went. 20 minutes later, the door to room 12 opened again. Andrew stepped out, his silver hair catching the dull light as he scanned the lot with a chilling, practiced indifference. Grace followed, her head still bowed, her spirits seemingly dampened by a weight I couldn't yet comprehend. He guided her into the passenger seat with a hand on her shoulder that looked, to any outsider, like a gesture of protection. To me, it looked like a brand of ownership. As their taillights flared and the sedan began to crunch over the wet gravel, pulling back toward the highway that led to the city, I shifted my truck into gear. I didn't turn on my lights. I stayed back, keeping 2 cars between us, moving through the mist like a shadow. My heart was still hammering against my ribs, but my hands were steady now. I was a firefighter who had found the seat of the fire, and I wasn't going to let it go out until I had enough fuel to burn Andrew Collins's world to the ground. The city skyline loomed in the distance, a forest of glass and steel where a monster was hiding in plain sight, and for the first time in 3 years, I wasn't just searching. I was hunting. The engine of my truck was still ticking, cooling down in the driveway of the home that had felt like a tomb for 3 years. I didn't go to bed. I couldn't. Instead, I bypassed the kitchen and went straight to the den, where a stack of dusty plastic bins sat tucked away in the back of the closet. These were the archives of a life I thought I knew, the physical remnants of 30 years of friendship and family. I sat on the floor, the light from a single desk lamp casting long, distorted shadows across the room. I pulled out the first album, the leather cracked and dry. There we were, Andrew and I at the Fire Academy graduation. I was beaming, my arm thrown over his shoulder, celebrating my first real step into service. But as I looked closer, past my own youthful grin, I saw Andrew's expression. He wasn't looking at the camera. He was looking at my wife, Jennifer, with a cold, calculating intensity that I had once mistaken for simple admiration. I flipped through the years, the pages turning with a rhythmic, ghostly rasp. Every milestone was tainted. At Grace's 5th birthday party, there was Andrew in the background, standing near the cake, his hand hovering just inches from Jennifer's waist. At my father's funeral, while I was blinded by grief, Andrew was there, whispering in the ear of our family lawyer, his helpful presence suddenly looking more like an intervention. The realization hit me like a physical blow, knocking the air from my lungs. I wasn't just a series of coincidences. Andrew hadn't just appeared in my life. He had woven himself into the very fabric of it, waiting for the threads to fray. He was there the night Jennifer's car went off the road, the first one on the scene to comfort me. He was there the night Grace supposedly walked out of our lives, bringing over a bottle of scotch and staying until dawn while the police took my statement. I stared at a photo taken just a week before Grace vanished. We were at his lake house, the 3 of us. Grace was laughing, her auburn hair bright against the summer sun. Andrew was standing behind her, his reflection caught in the glass door. He wasn't smiling. He looked like a man surveying an investment, a hunter who had finally cornered his prize. For 3 decades, I had invited the wolf into my home and called him brother. I had shared my bread, my secrets, and my sorrows with a man who had been systematically dismantling my happiness to build a monument to his own ego. The best friend I thought I had was a fiction, a mask worn by a ghost who had been haunting my family since the beginning. I closed the album, the sound echoing like a gunshot in the quiet house. I was done grieving. The firefighter in me was gone. Only the father remained, and he was ready to burn the past to save the future. The next morning, the sun didn't so much rise as it did stain the sky a bruised purple. I didn't head to the fire station, but I did reach out to a man who had retired the same year I did, Pete, a former fire marshal with a memory like a steel trap and a brother who worked in the city's zoning and records department. We met at a greasy spoon on the edge of the industrial district, where the coffee was strong enough to peel paint and the booths provided a necessary measure of privacy. "I need a list, Pete," I said, sliding a napkin across the table with 3 addresses of Andrew's known developments. "But not the ones on the brochures. I need the shells. The renovation projects that have been in permitting for years. Anything owned by subsidiaries or holding companies linked to Collins International." Pete looked at me, his eyes searching my face for the reason behind the request. He saw the salt and pepper hair, the steady blue eyes, and the exhaustion that went deeper than bone. He didn't ask questions. He knew that when a man like me came asking for a paper trail, there was a fire burning that no truck could put out. 2 hours later, my inbox pinged with a secure PDF. As I scrolled through the digital graveyard of Andrew's empire, the scale of his deception began to crystallize. There were over a dozen properties, old Victorian homes in historic districts, decommissioned warehouses, and mid-rise apartments, all held under names like Silver Oak Holdings or Emerald Creek LC. They were ghost buildings, perpetually under construction, drawing no utilities but registered for high-end, private security services. I cross-referenced the locations with the GPS history I'd pulled from Andrew's phone. The blue dot hadn't just visited these places. It lingered. It stayed for hours in the middle of the night. These weren't investments. They were a network of high-priced cells. One property in particular caught my eye, an old brownstone on 4th Street that Andrew had supposedly bought to preserve Jennifer's favorite neighborhood. The records showed it had been outfitted with industrial-grade soundproofing and a private elevator that didn't appear on the original blueprints. My blood turned to ice. He hadn't just hidden Grace. He had built a labyrinth in the heart of the city, using the very landmarks of my life to camouflage her prison. Every time I had thanked him for his generosity in preserving our local history, I had been thanking the man who was keeping my daughter in a gilded cage. I closed my laptop, the screen reflecting the hardened expression of a man who finally had the map to the fire. I wasn't just looking for a daughter anymore. I was documenting a crime scene. The steak hissed in the cast-iron skillet, the sound mimicking the static in my brain. I moved with the practiced efficiency of a man who had spent a lifetime navigating smoke-filled rooms, but my focus wasn't on the meal. Hidden behind a stack of mail on the sideboard, my phone was positioned perfectly, its microphone live and recording every vibration in the air. The doorbell rang at exactly 7 o'clock. Andrew was never late. When I opened the door, he stood there with a bottle of expensive Cabernet and that practiced expression of somber concern he had worn like a second skin for 3 years. "Thomas," he said, pulling me into a firm, brotherly embrace. "You sounded a bit off on the phone today. I thought you might need the company." "Just one of those days, Andrew," I lied, my voice steady as I stepped back. "The anniversary is coming up. You know how it is." We sat at the mahogany dining table, the same table where Grace used to do her homework, and where Andrew had sat countless times pretending to help me find her. As he poured the wine, his silver hair caught the light of the chandelier, the very same hair I had seen disappearing into room 12 at the Blue Pine Motel just 48 hours ago. "Any news from the private investigator?" Andrew asked, his tone a masterclass in feigned hope. He swirled his wine, his sharp features softened by the candlelight. "Nothing. It's like she vanished into thin air," I said, watching him over the rim of my glass. "Sometimes I wonder if someone I know was involved. Someone she trusted." Andrew didn't flinch. He didn't even blink. He leaned forward, reaching across the table to place a hand on my arm. "Thomas, listen to me. We've explored every lead. You have to stop torturing yourself with these conspiracies. Grace was independent, a bit impulsive. She wanted to start over. It's painful, but you have to accept that she chose to leave. The sheer coldness of the lie vibrated through me. He was gaslighting a man whose daughter he had currently padlocked in a soundproofed brownstone. He spoke about her choice with such conviction that I almost admired the sociopathy of it. You're probably right, I murmured, playing the broken man. I don't know what I'd do without you, Andrew. You're the only one who stayed. I'll always be here, Tom, he replied, his eyes reflecting a terrifying, possessive pride. I promised Jennifer I'd look out for you both. I intend to keep that promise. I nodded, pretending to be moved while my skin crawled. Every word was being captured, every fake assurance documented. He thought he was comforting a victim, but he was actually delivering his own confession into a digital file. As he took a satisfied sip of his wine, I realized the man sitting across from me didn't just want my life. He wanted to be the hero of the tragedy he had authored. I didn't see a friend anymore. I saw a structure fully engulfed, and I was just waiting for the right moment to let it all collapse. The city was a labyrinth of glass and concrete, and Andrew Collins was its master architect. Using the floor plans Pete had slipped me, I found myself standing before the Vanguard Tower, a half-finished luxury high-rise that Andrew's firm had officially halted due to structural concerns. It was a ghost in the skyline, wrapped in construction netting that flapped in the wind like a shroud. I didn't need a key. I knew the vulnerabilities of a building like this, the service entrances, the blind spots in the security perimeter, the way a man in a high-visibility vest and a hard hat could disappear into the skeleton of a skyscraper. I moved through the staging area, my heart hammering a rhythm against my ribs that felt like a warning. The elevator was locked out, so I took the stairs, my 65 lungs burning as I climbed toward the 22nd floor. The penthouse suite was supposed to be a hollow shell of girders and dust, but when I reached the landing, the air changed. The smell of sawdust and wet cement was replaced by the faint, antiseptic scent of a high-end hospital. I rounded the corner and saw it. A heavy, reinforced steel door that didn't belong in a construction zone. It was outfitted with a biometric scanner and a silent, digital lock. I didn't have the code, but I had a firefighter's bypass tool and the knowledge of where the emergency manual overrides were hidden in the ceiling panels. With a sharp thunk, the magnets disengaged. The door swung open on silent hinges, revealing a world that shouldn't exist. It was a gilded cage. The walls were lined with thick, acoustic foam disguised as designer wallpaper, designed to swallow every scream. There were no windows, only high-definition screens displaying a live feed of a peaceful forest. A fake window for a fake life. In the center of the room, sitting on a plush velvet sofa that looked tragically out of place, was Grace. She was staring at one of the screens, her auburn hair falling over her shoulders in a tangled mess. She didn't even look up when I entered. She looked like someone who had long since stopped expecting the door to open for anyone but a monster. Grace, I whispered, the word breaking in my throat. She flinched, her hazel eyes darting to mine with a terror so profound it nearly brought me to my knees. For 3 years, I had imagined this reunion in the sunlight, in the park, in our home. I never imagined finding her in a soundproofed vault, hidden in the bones of a building my best friend had built specifically to bury her alive. I stepped into the room, the weight of the betrayal finally fully settling in my gut. I wasn't just here to see her. I was here to dismantle the man who thought he could own a human soul. The silence in the room was heavy, a physical weight that seemed to swallow the sound of my own ragged breathing. I stayed by the steel door, my heart fracturing at the sight of Grace. She looked like a ghost of the girl who had left 3 years ago. Her auburn hair lacked its luster, and her skin possessed the translucent pallor of someone who hadn't seen the sun in 1,000 days. Grace, I said again, my voice cracking like dry timber. It's me. It's Dad. I'm getting you out of here. She didn't run to me. She didn't scream. Instead, she recoiled, pressing her back against the velvet sofa as if trying to merge with the fabric. Her hazel eyes, once so bright with intelligence, were clouded with a frantic, flickering terror. "You can't be here," she whispered, her voice thin and raspy from disuse. "Thomas, you have to go. Before he finds out. If he sees you, he'll stop helping us." The way she used my name, not Dad, but Thomas, felt like a blade to the ribs. I took a slow step forward, keeping my hands visible, the way I would with a victim trapped in a collapsing floor. "Grace, look at me. Andrew didn't help anyone. He's been lying to me, and he's been lying to you." "No." She shook her head violently, the movement mechanical and jerky. "He told me about the fire, Dad. He told me the house burned down after I left. He said you were unstable, that the police thought I was the one who said He said he was the only reason you weren't in prison. He's been paying them to keep the file closed. He's protecting us." The sheer scale of the sickness settled in my gut. Andrew hadn't just built a physical cage. He had built a psychological one, using my career as a firefighter and my grief as a weapon against my own daughter. He had convinced her that her freedom would be my undoing. "The house is fine, Grace," I said, my voice hardening with a newfound clarity. "There was no fire. There is no investigation. Look at my hands. I held them out, steady and scarred. I've spent every second of the last 3 years looking for you. He didn't protect me. He buried me alive, just like he buried you." She looked at my hands, then back at the forest flickering on the high-definition screens. A single tear tracked through the dust on her cheek. The conditioning was deep, a web of lies spun by a master manipulator, but I could see the first thread beginning to snap. "He loves you," she whimpered, though it sounded more like a question than a statement. "He loves the power," I countered, moving closer until I could smell the antiseptic scent of her prison. "And right now, that power is failing. I'm not leaving without you, Grace. Not this time." The light in the room suddenly flickered, a red status LED on the door panel beginning to pulse. A silent alarm. We were out of time. The master architect knew someone had breached his vault, and the rescue was about to become a war. The red pulse of the door panel wasn't just a warning. It was a countdown. Downstairs, in the grand ballroom of the Vanguard Tower, the city's elite were clinking champagne glasses to celebrate Andrew's latest architectural triumph. He was likely on stage right now, basking in the spotlight, unaware that the foundation of his lie was about to be gutted. "Grace, stay behind me," I commanded, the authoritative bark of a fire captain returning to my voice. I pulled a small, heavy canister from my tactical vest, not a weapon, but a specialized smoke generator used for high-rise training. I jammed it into the HVAC intake vent in the hallway. Within seconds, a thick, white, odorless plume began to billow, triggering the building's advanced infrared sensors. The sirens didn't just wail. They screamed, a piercing mechanical howl that echoed through the hollow bones of the skyscraper. On the 22nd floor, the magnetic locks on the emergency exits hummed and died, a standard safety override Andrew couldn't bypass without risking a mass casualty disaster. "Is it happening again?" Grace shrieked, her hands over her ears, the old conditioning flaring up. "No," I said, grabbing her hand and pulling her toward the stairwell. "This is the real world, Grace. And in the real world, I'm the one who controls the fire." We descended the concrete stairs, the sound of our boots a frantic rhythm against the metal treads. As we reached the mezzanine overlooking the ballroom, the scene below was pure chaos. Hundreds of socialites in silk and tuxedos were bottlenecking toward the exits, their faces tight with the very panic Andrew had spent 3 years inflicting on us. Through the haze of the artificial smoke, I saw him. Andrew was standing near the podium, his silver hair stark against the red emergency lights. He wasn't looking at the exits. He was looking up, his eyes darting toward the elevators, his polished mask finally cracking into a jagged expression of pure, desperate rage. He knew. I draped my high-visibility jacket over Grace's auburn hair, tucking her head against my chest as we merged with the stampeding crowd. To the panicked onlookers and the arriving first responders, we were just an elderly man and his daughter escaping the heat. We moved past the private security details and the flashing lights of the fire trucks, the cool night air hitting our faces like a benediction. I didn't stop until we reached the truck. I bundled her into the passenger seat, the same seat Andrew had occupied just nights before. As I threw the vehicle into gear and pulled away from the curb, I caught a glimpse of the Vanguard Tower in the rearview mirror. It was wrapped in mist and sirens, a monument to a man who had tried to play God. I looked at Grace, whose hazel eyes were finally fixed on the moon, and I knew that while the building was standing, the prison was gone. The extraction was complete, but the fire was just getting started. The fire alarm had done its job, but the true heat was yet to come. Instead of fleeing into the night, I had circled back to the security hub of the Vanguard Tower, a room I knew was accessible via the service basement. While the crowds were being funneled into the street, the internal systems were still live, and my years as a captain gave me the calm required to override the building's digital heart. I didn't stop until I had patched my phone directly into the ballroom's massive, 4-story projection screens, the same screens meant to display Andrew's architectural legacy. I walked back into the grand ballroom. The smoke was clearing, leaving a ghostly haze over the abandoned crystal glasses and half-eaten hors d'oeuvres. Andrew was there, standing alone near the stage, his tuxedo disheveled, his silver hair no longer perfect. He looked like a man watching his kingdom crumble. When he saw me step out of the shadows, his eyes didn't fill with fear. They filled with a terrifying, arrogant possessiveness. "Thomas," he spat, his voice echoing in the vast, empty space. "You have no idea what you've done." Grace was safe. She was mine to protect. "You've ruined everything for a girl who doesn't even know who you are anymore." "She knows exactly who I am, Andrew," I said, my voice steady, my blue eyes fixed on his. "And in a minute, the whole city is going to know exactly who you are." I hit the command on my phone. The screens surrounding the ballroom roared to life. I wasn't the promotional video of the Vanguard Tower. It was the footage from my dinner with Andrew, the recording of him leaning across the table, his hand on my arm, lying about Grace's choice to leave. Then, the image cut to the grainier, infrared feed from my body cam, the moment I entered the hidden suite on the 22nd floor. The silence of the room was shattered by the sound of Grace's whimpering voice through the speakers, pleading for me to leave before he found out. The screen showed the soundproofed walls, the fake forest windows, and the sheer, hollow terror in my daughter's eyes. Andrew's face went gray. The polished real estate mogul vanished, replaced by a frantic, cornered animal. Outside, the police and the media, who had arrived for the fire, were peering through the glass doors, their cameras capturing the broadcast playing on the internal monitors. "You think this stops me?" Andrew hissed, stepping toward me. "I built this city, Thomas. I own the people who make the laws." "You built a cage, Andrew," I said, stepping back as the heavy doors of the ballroom finally burst open, the police charging in with their weapons drawn. "And a cage is only strong until someone finds the door. You're not a builder. You're a ghost." And the sun just came up. As the handcuffs clicked around his wrists, the silver hair I had once respected was forced down toward the marble floor. I didn't stay to watch him be led away. I turned my back on the wreckage of our friendship and walked toward the exit, where the real auburn hair was waiting for me in the back of an ambulance, finally breathing air that didn't belong to a monster. The morning sun finally broke through the stubborn Seattle mist, spilling across the back porch in long, golden ribbons. It was a quiet light, the kind that didn't demand anything but presence. I sat in my old wooden rocker, the rhythmic creak of the floorboards under my boots the only sound in the garden besides the distant, hopeful chirping of a robin. Beside me, Grace sat in the chair that had belonged to her mother. For the first few months after the Vanguard Tower fell, she had stayed in the shadows of the house, her eyes constantly tracking the doors, her ears straining for the sound of Andrew's polished, silver-tongued voice. But today, her auburn hair was loose, catching the light until it glowed like embers in a hearth that had finally been relit. She was holding a real book, not a screen. Her thumb traced the edge of the page, a simple, human gesture that grounded us both in a reality Andrew hadn't authored. We didn't talk about the trial much anymore. The headlines about the real estate predator and the fallen architect had faded, replaced by the mundane, beautiful details of a life reclaimed. Andrew was behind bars, stripped of his suits and his secrets, but his greatest punishment wasn't the sentence. It was the fact that we were happy without him. "Dad," she said softly, not looking up from her book. "Yeah, Grace? The garden looks good this year. The hydrangeas are finally coming back." I looked out at the blue and purple blooms. They had been neglected for 3 years, choked by weeds while I was busy chasing ghosts. It had taken a lot of work to clear the rot, to prune back the dead wood, and to trust the soil again. "They just needed a little sunlight," I said, my voice steady and thick with a peace I hadn't felt since before Jennifer died. "And someone to watch over them." She reached out, her hand finding mine on the armrest. Her grip was firm now, no longer trembling with the phantom fears of the high-rise. I looked at our hands, the salt and pepper hair of a man who had survived the fire, and the auburn hair of the daughter who had risen from the ash. We were survivors of a different kind of disaster, one built of betrayal and glass, but as the warmth of the porch settled into our bones, I knew the structure of our lives was finally sound. The nightmare was over. The hunter was caged, the daughter was home, and for the first time in 1,000 days, the air I breathed was entirely my own. They say that a house is only as strong as its foundation, and for 30 years, I believed mine was built on granite. I thought I knew the man who stood by me at my wife's funeral. I thought I knew the man who helped me hang missing posters for my daughter until my fingers bled. But the hardest lesson I learned isn't just that monsters exist. It's that they don't always look like strangers in the dark. Sometimes they look like your best friend of 30 years. They look like the person holding the camera, the person giving the toast, the person who knows exactly where you keep your spare key and your deepest secrets. Andrew didn't just steal my daughter. He tried to steal my reality. He used my own loyalty as a blindfold. And if there's one thing I want you to take away from my story, it's this: trust is a gift, but blind trust is a vulnerability. Pay attention to the digital heartbeats in your life, the small inconsistencies, the pings that don't add up, and the gut feelings you've been told to ignore. The people who truly love you will never ask you to sacrifice your truth to keep them comfortable. I'm still learning how to build a life where the sunlight reaches every corner, and I want to help you do the same. If this story put a light on a shadow in your own life, or if you believe that justice should always have the final word, then walk this path with me. Hit that subscribe button and join our community. We're unmasking the truth, one story at a time, so that no one else has to search for 3 years to find what was hidden in plain sight. Thank you for listening. Stay vigilant, stay disciplined, and I'll see you in the next story.